Jacob's all dressed up too. How you doing, Jacob? Can you hear us
I'm
okay?
good.
Yeah.
I can hear
All right.
you. Yeah.
Well, we got to get the inspiration for your costume.
I walked. I walked. I walked into my son's room and took his wig.
He's
And a
wigging
little
the
child
sheriff's
shall
hat, it
lead
looks
us.
like.
And a little child shall lead us. And a little child shall lead
Yeah. Yeah.
us.
so, so thank you so much for joining us, Jacob. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Great. All right. So before we jump into your scary story, um, you have quite a resume. So, including again part of being the part of the famed Ring franchise. How did you get into film, and specifically, why did you choose horror for some of your films?
Yeah. Um, I got into film, I think, starting when I was little with a Super 8 camera and a video camera.
Super 8.
Had a, my father had one of those VHS cameras that was this big, So we were documenting stuff in my childhood, and I put the camera on my shoulder and enjoyed that. And eventually just started writing plays, actually, and making short films, and nothing to do with horror. And at some point, I wanted to do screenplays and um, migrated into that, and I wrote what became my first movie, which was Mean Creek, which came out in 2004, I think. And the Mean Creek got lots of accolades and won awards and stuff like that, but the poster looked very much like a horror movie.
Yeah.
I put the Israeli version of it here. It doesn't look like a horror movie here, but the one that Paramount released was a hand coming up through the water. It looked horrific. And I think a lot of people just assumed that I was a horror writer and director, and started hiring me to write horror stuff.
Okay.
Not necessarily based on Mean Creek being, it was horrific. And I love horror movies. I always have, and so I have sort of been interested in that and pursued it. Mostly in my new movie, He's Watching, where I just made a horror movie at home.
Wow.
That was the most pure horror movie I've ever made. Yeah.
And people watching, you can actually find that in the link in our description. Check out that movie, He's Watching. Yeah, that's pretty awesome. So you did that at your home during the pandemic?
Yeah, my kids were obviously locked in, and one of the things that we did at night, my son wanted to watch horror movies. He just was interested in it, and I think it was a release, for all the horrific stuff that was going on around the pandemic. I mean, we didn't know that. We thought everybody was going to die. There was points like that.
Mm-hmm.
And kids were profoundly affected by that. And we're not, our only rule around our kids has been we don't want to show them slasher movies. But if there's good horror movies, we're happy to watch them. And so we start watching every single one imaginable. Something's growling. That's horrific.
Yeah, that's
Is that
that's
it's
it's Robbie's stomach.
So the end of my story, I'll make it brief, was that at some point we were watching some really bad horror movies, and I said, we could make one here at the house probably better than that. And everybody took me seriously, and so I got out my phone and we started shooting it, improvised.
Oh, sweet.
And 2 years later, I sold the movie to XYZ Films, and they put it out in the world.
Nice.
That's amazing.
I haven't seen that one yet, but I actually saw Don't Let Go. Mostly because it had some of my favorite actors in it, with David Oyelowo and Brian Tyree Henry. For those that don't know who that is, that's Paperboy from the show Atlanta. I gotta say, I really liked the movie because you wrote and directed this one, and it has a really interesting premise to it. For me, it sort of felt like Memento meets kind of Get Out or something. So how did you come up with the concept?
There was an original writer who had written this 90-page screenplay, and the first 5 pages of that story, a little girl died, and her uncle, who was grieving her, got a phone call from her. And that struck me as an incredible premise, and I expected that to be followed down the line as I continued to read that screenplay, but it didn't. And so at that time, I was on the phone talking about it with Jason Blum and his company, and I said, I like the first 5 pages a lot, and what if we just did that for 100 pages?
Nice.
And they said, for it, to try. So wrote a screenplay and made that movie.
Awesome. I loved it. RB, I'm
Thanks.
sorry, I think I cut you off. What were you saying?
Yeah, no, I was just curious. With he's watching, shooting that at home. Lonnie Ross from 30 Rock. I'm just curious if his comedic background comes into play at all in his performance as the Snow Creeper.
No. Only when I was like, no, Lonnie, don't be so silly. No, we just had a lot of fun together, putting on the costumes, using it. We went to the thrift store and found the right costume for him, laughed a lot about it, and went up into the snow. He got frostbite on his fingers. That was pretty funny.
Just because I know that a lot of comedic actors have a little bit of darkness.
Yeah, no, a lot of comedians do have a lot of darkness. That's right. Mostly that they hide, and from their performances, stuff that they deal with on a daily basis. That they're fighting with comedy.
Yeah. All right.
And where can we find or watch Don't Let Go?
Don't Let Go? You can probably find that on Amazon somewhere.
Yeah, I saw it on Google Play. Yeah.
Yeah, and then He's Watching you can find on Vudu or Amazon or iTunes or anything like that.
Okay. All right.
I do have one final question, just because this
Real quick.
was a family project. Do you ever use any of your wife's music in your production?
Yeah, my wife is in the movie. She's a creature called the Face Monster. She turns around and screams, and her whole face is a mouth, giant screaming. But yeah, she also plays a character called the Shadow Demon or the Shower Demon, and she's singing in the shower one of her original songs. And the kid is attracted to her music, and then her music comes on the stereo at one point. And then I wrote a song about 25 years ago that I put in the closing credits, and I had her singing backup 25 years later.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Nice.
That's amazing.
All right. It's time to get into our spooky stories. And of course, we're starting with our guest. So, Jacob, I'm going to let you take it away. Tell us your spooky story.
Well, my spooky story requires a little background. It's to do with my father and my father's partner, who died of AIDS about 20 years ago. And my dad's partner was this very into his clothing, had a walk-in closet built for himself, and all this incredible clothing that he bought downtown San Francisco and around the world when he would travel. And he had shoes, so many pairs of shoes. And my father, when he was grieving, he never got rid of that clothing and never got rid of those shoes. And you can imagine 20 years later or so, that fabric starts to get eaten up by moths, and there's mold on it, and it starts to smell. And recently, my dad left his house for another place, and I took it upon myself to donate any of the usable clothes to charity and throw out the rest. And so I sorted them all into boxes, and these boxes took up like probably 20 square feet of floor outside of my dad's bedroom.
Wow.
On the exterior deck behind his house. And there are these French doors that lead to that deck. And I closed the French doors up and left the clothing there for the night. He lives up on a mountain in Northern California, far away from anything. And I was laying in his bedroom that night watching this pretty bad Liam Neeson movie called Memory. And when
Horrible.
sorry, whoever made that movie. I don't usually do that, but it was good enough I could watch the whole thing. Let's put it that way. And I turned it off, and I started to hear noises. Noises that I would normally assume were just animals on the mountain. But they got a little disturbing for some reason. And I started to wonder if someone was outside the house. And I looked over to the French doors where right outside were about 20 boxes of old clothing. And I asked myself, are those doors closed and locked? And so I sort of meandered over to the doors and I took a look at them, and they were open just maybe a little quarter of an inch, half an inch. And they're the kind of doors that you can't really see if they're locked or not, except by opening it and pushing the little button, inside the mechanism. You can't turn a switch and lock it. And I really didn't want to open the door because I was creeped out by the noises.
Yeah.
And at this point, I actually wasn't thinking about the clothing outside or anything like that. But when you hear the rest of my story, you'll understand that growling's coming back.
It's scary.
That was awful. So I decided I'm going to close the door. And as I close the door, there's this sudden thud, and the door pushes back towards me. And all of a sudden, I'm like a scared 6-year-old child, horrified. And I put I'm 250 pounds. I put all of my weight into the door, and it pushed me back yet again. And then I pushed it back yet again. And I'm thinking there's somebody outside. And I pull out my phone, which is in my pocket, and turn on the flashlight. And of course, all I can see is the reflection in the glass at that point. And so I turned off my phone, and I stood there like just my heart racing for about 5 minutes and waiting for something to happen, waiting for somebody or something to run away from the door, and nothing ever did. And my eyes adjusted, and I looked through the glass, and there was just nothing there. But the boxes of my dad's passed away boyfriend and his clothing in those boxes, right? And I started to wonder if his spirit wasn't out there tending to his prized possession and then was trying to get to the house. And there was no thermal reason why this would have happened. It was cold outside and warm inside. You'd think if it was hot outside, maybe it would push there. There was no wind. So I don't really know what it was, other than that it scared the hell out of me. And I refused to sleep in the bedroom that night. So I
would have been the same way.
Barricaded myself into my old childhood bedroom. And
wow.
That's
crazy.
So